Good afternoon, young people, brothers and sisters, young at heart. We welcome you on this day. Our brother Jared will be speaking to us, and we'll be having a video on who are the Palestinians. But before we commence, we'll open with a prayer, and we'll do a reading from Revelations, chapter 9. So I'll open our session this afternoon. You may remain seated as we open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Most High, we approach unto Thee at this time, giving thanks for this quiet time removed from the cares of the world, to have this opportunity, Heavenly Father, to have our brother expound unto us words of history and background, so we know, Heavenly Father, how Thy great plan comes to work on this earth. Many in our midst are on beds of illness, are spiritually ill, mourning. We ask that you suit them blessings and wrap Thy loving arms around them and comfort them at this time. As we know, Heavenly Father, through Thee all things are possible. We ask that Thy book be not closed at this time, and there's more called to this knowledge of the truth. And may this light stand continue to burn brightly in this Largo, Tampa area. We ask all things now in Thy Son's name, our Lord and Master, Jesus Christ. Amen. Revelations chapter 9. Verse 12 verses. Revelations 9, verses 1 through 12. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. And on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. Thus concludes Revelations 9, verses 1 to 12. And now our brother Jared will give us the talk. Who are the Palestinians? Brother Jared.
Thank you, Louis. Yes, please. So, you're probably wondering, huh? Like I was when I read this chapter in Revelation chapter 9. And it actually has a lot to do with who the Palestinians are today, because this is the beginning of the time of Muhammad. Now, it doesn't come out at you in this chapter very clearly because it's a vision. And visions are not always, they need to be interpreted, okay? And what we're going to see is that all the way back in the Byzantine Empire, when Muhammad first started his vision of what he wanted his religion to be, this was just the beginning of the Arabs coming together, which eventually led to where we are today, Arabs in the land of Israel. Now, how did they get there? Where did they come from? Why do they think that they're Palestinians? They have no heritage like the Jews do, who have been in the land for 5,000 years. They are essentially established themselves as a group of people only in the last 100 years. But they claim to have heritage that goes back further than that. So we're gonna break down Revelation a little bit and try to digest what's being said here. Hopefully this works. Now this was actually 6 classes that I gave in Sunday school, so I'm going to have to talk really fast and skip a lot of slides, but that's okay. You're going to get the truncated college version. So here we go. So in terms of timeline, we're really talking about the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Byzantine Empire. And we'll take a look later at the Ottoman Empire, which came after the Byzantine Empire, to see where the Muslims ended up at that point. Now, in Revelation, it talks about this 5th trumpet and the angel sounding this trumpet, and is given this key, which is a symbol of power of this bottomless pit. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given this key of the bottomless pit. Well, that star is very significant, because that star was a stone or a meteorite that fell from the sky. Okay? Literally, as it's written in Revelation, it fell from the sky. And guess who picked it up? Muhammad picked it up. And when he picked it up, fire and smoke supposedly came out of the earth. But this fire and smoke doesn't represent fire and smoke. It represents the beginning of an explosion of a population of people. And in this bottomless pit is given the key, or the power, to change the heavens. Sun and moon are darkened, and the key usually refers to a rulership. So, hear, O heavens, hear, O earth, Revelation 3 verse 7 says, Jesus given the key of David, a symbol of power. And the bottomless pit, out of it come all these judgments of the Almighty God. So he opened the bottomless pit, and there came a smoke out of the pit, and as the smoke of the great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of smoke of the pit. And out of that pit come all these locusts. And we're going to talk about the locusts a little bit, because these locusts actually represent people or warriors. And if you ever look at a locust, you'll see that it looks like, when you zoom in on the head, it looks like a horse. And that's exactly what they were on when they had this crusade of this Ottoman Empire. So unto them was given the power, as scorpions are given power. The Strong's word is akris. Almost every spring are carried the wind from Arabia to Palestine, and having devastated that country, migrate by region further north until they perish by falling into the sea. And this power would arise out of this area of the earth of Arabia. So the king, it says a king shall rule over them in verse 11, and it seems like a paradox, because locusts have a king over them, but in Proverbs, locusts have no king. The word means destruction, and king means prince or commander or lord. In Revelation 9 it says they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue was Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath the name Apollyon. Verse 27, which we didn't read, the locusts have no king, yet they go forth, all of them by bands. So there's no king leading these locusts. So who inhabited the area of Arabia? Well, we know in Genesis 16, verse 11, and the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction, and he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So we're talking about the lineage of Ishmael here. And he was later cast out. And it says that he would become a great nation. So Genesis 21 says, Arise, lift up the lad, and behold him in thy hand, and I will make him a great nation. Okay? And God opened her eyes, and she saw the well of water. And in verse 20, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer, and he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran. So this is the great nation that would come out of the area of Arabia. It's a group of people who normally do not get along very well, but somehow are led by this great king. Now the star that fell from heaven is really a meteor. It says the fifth angel sounded, I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And this star helps us understand who this king is. Because the star falls and all these judgments are to follow, and then the judgment from this angel is against the Roman Empire, and that king, as we're going to see, is the King Muhammad. Now, the people were walking around Mecca because he set up this stone and he set up this Kaaba, okay, which you see in the center of this, on the left here. It's this big square, ugly-looking thing, which now has this huge Colosseum wrapped around it. And this is where once in a lifetime, a Muslim has to go to Mecca to give honor to Muhammad. And so the cornerstone, the top cornerstone of this Kaaba is made up of this rock, that stone, that's meteor that fell from heaven, that Muhammad rebranded as a stone that came from the altar of Abraham. So he claims it came from the altar of Abraham, it fell from heaven and was given to him, and now it's now made up of the Kaaba as the cornerstone of the Kaaba. So all the Arabs go there every year, millions of them flock around this, and they go around the Colosseum to represent the stars, moons, and the heavens. And they walk around this kind of orbital type of walk. Hopefully this loads. I hope it does. Give it a second. And the black stones believed to be this meteorite that fell from heaven. They set up these 360 idols surrounding the area, and they circle this, which is called a tawaf, and they trace the infliction of the sun and how it moves. Now, a lot of Arabs don't even understand this, but this is the historical background behind it. Hopefully this plays. I'm just going to give you a quick view of what it actually looks like. Here we go. So those little dots on the screen are people. And they're walking around this big square building which has the cornerstone that Muhammad found. And there's different tiers. You'll see the different tiers if as you grow in the Muslim religion, you get to go higher. So there's some on the second tier, you can barely see them, but they're little dots walking across, and there's some on the very top tier walking around. And they walk around this big thing of 360 idols and basically celebrate Muhammad. So I'm not going to show any more of that. Back to the presentation, hopefully. Okay. So Muhammad lived in Mecca, and he was raised by his uncle, who was called Hazma ibn Abu Mitab, and his mother and father, because his mother and father had died. Instead of getting rid of the stone, he just rebranded it. And he said he claimed that this was the last remaining stone piece of the altar of Abraham, built by his son Ishmael, which we know is not correct. So we know that was Isaac, right? So he set it up to be reverenced, and hence you have this connection now to Revelation chapter 9. So we know we're talking about Muhammad. So who is Muhammad? Well, he claimed to have been visited by the angel Gabriel in this cave in Mount Hira in 1610 AD. So now we have a time period that we can connect to Revelation chapter 9. And according to the bibliographies of Muhammad, while he was in retreat on this mountain near the cave in Mecca, Gabriel, the angel, comes to him, and he commands him to recite the first lines of the chapter 96 of the Quran. Now, interestingly enough, Muhammad couldn't read. He was illiterate. But I guess God gave him a moment lapse and allowed him to read the Quran from chapter 96. And here's what it says. It is no less than inspiration sent down to him. He was taught by one mighty in power, eluded with wisdom, for he appeared in stately form while he was in the highest part of the horizon. Then he approached and came closer. That's in Quran 53. So Muhammad couldn't read. He was illiterate, but supposedly he was told to read from this chapter 96 of the Quran. So who was Muhammad? Well, he believed in a monotheistic God. Monotheistic means one God. Okay? Islam means, in Arabic, means to submit or to surrender. So you submit yourself to God, which is really, when you think about it, it's very biblical. We're supposed to submit ourselves to God. A Muslim is supposed to be a submitter. They submit to one God and to the Prophet Muhammad. Unlike today, they now are not monotheistic because they believe in idols, and they have these 360 idols that surround the Kaaba. So the legend continues. Muhammad then is taken to Jerusalem, and this is how Jerusalem comes into the picture. Supposedly he was taken on a fiery horse, transported to Jerusalem, and he was to set up a temple there. And that is the temple today called the Temple Mount. Okay? So he falls asleep, he's transported to Jerusalem, to this Temple Mount, and he rides on this fiery horse into heaven where he's supposed to meet Jesus, Moses, and Abraham. Kind of sounds familiar, like the Transfiguration, but twisted. And there he gives glory to Allah, who did take the servant journey by night from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque, whose precincts he did bless in order that he might show the same of our signs, so on and so forth. So here you have the Temple Mount here. Why is it so sacred? Well, he rebranded. He said, this Dome of the Rock is the third holiest site in Islam. It's called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the Quran does not mention it anywhere that he sacrificed at this rock, but this is Muhammad bringing these things up. And now it's said to be the place where Ishmael was sacrificed, no longer Isaac. So Muhammad's quest was to clean up the idols. He actually had a good quest. Usually out of something good comes something bad. But he started actually quite good. He wanted to clean up all the idols. Well, when you start cleaning up people's televisions and throwing them away, people get kind of mad. Like, that's my TV, don't take it. Okay? So obviously war broke out. And one of the biggest wars was this war. I don't know if I put it in here. Yeah. The Battle of Badr. This was the first war that he fought, and it was impossible odds. 300 of his men against 900 idol worshippers. He was going to lose, right? But he didn't, because his men were warriors, and he won. And when he won, he set up Ramadan. So you ever wonder what Ramadan is about? It's a day of rest. It's supposed to be a day of rest symbolizing the Battle of Badr, where they won 300 against 900. So Muhammad's fighters fought and in tight formation, and they destroyed the enemy. Well, there was a final battle, and this was the beginning of Islam. This was the Battle of Medina, where he heads back to Medina and he fights 10,000 of these idol worshippers. You can take on 900, now let's take on 10,000 of them. So at that point, that's when he becomes their king. And in this march, the pagan rulers of Mecca sent out 10,000 and to try to put an end to Muhammad's success. But Muhammad is said to have cried out, "At last the fire is kindled in the furnace." Which, what does that sound like? We just read it in Revelation chapter 9. The earth opens up, and out comes this furnace of black smoke, right? And this is exactly what he said. So we don't have to make things up here. Scripture just happens to align with reality. And this is prophecy come true. Now, when I first read this, I opened up by saying, Like, what is this saying? But when you actually start putting the pieces together, you realize that Revelation 9 is really the key to us understanding where Muhammad came from. Okay, so these locusts. We know there's locusts mentioned in Scripture in many places. They're mentioned in Egypt, right? The locusts come. And there's different stages of the locust. You have the palmer worm, the caterpillar, the cankerworm, and then you have the full locust. Okay, so we're talking about the mature locust stage here. I won't talk about Joel, but Joel talks about locusts. But these locusts, it says, the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and their heads were like crowns of gold. Well, the crowns of gold were these turbans that Muhammad had his men wear. They were golden turbans. And they got on horses and they fought with shield and with buckler. And it says here, their crowns of gold, and their faces were the faces of men. And they had hair like the hair of women, because they had these long hair. They had made a vow not to cut their hair. So they had to twirl it up and put this golden turban around their hair. If you look at a lot of Muslims today, they don't cut their hair. They wear this turban to cover their head. Now, I don't need to wear one because I don't have much hair left, but but they did. And so they had this breastplate, was a breastplate of iron, and their wings was as the sound of chariots and horses running to battle, because that's what they were doing. They're trying to destroy the idol worshippers. And if you look at this picture here, zoomed up of a full caterpillar, it's a rough caterpillar locust before they become a locust, you can see the shape of their head looks like the shape of a horse. Okay? And it says in Revelation 9, the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. And the head of the locust resembles the horse. And the Italians call this a cavalletta. Hopefully I said that right. Or a little horse. Okay? And they appointed a captain against her, caused the horses to come up as the rough caterpillars. And Jeremiah likens the locust to a horse as well. The dictionary says that the head of a locust is like that of a horse, and the Italians call it a cavalletta, or a little horse. That's the word for cavalletta, for locust. So here you see what they might have looked like back in that time. It says the shapes of their locusts were like horses prepared into battle. Here you see on his head the turban, heads of gold or crowns of gold, and their faces were like faces of men, because they were men. And they had hair as the hair of a woman, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. Okay, so after a while, Muhammad's getting old, and he has to appoint people to help him. So he appoints this Khalfa, who is like the very first guy, and this guy is pretty ruthless too. He's a mean character. It says that the people were like the teeth of a lion. Well, here you have Muhammad. He says, "Who will be my visor and lieutenant?" And this Allah Abai Talab says, "O Prophet, I will be thy visor. I am the man. Whoever rises against thee, I will dash out his teeth, tear out his eyes, break up his legs, rip up his belly. O Prophet, I will be thy visor." Again, another connection to Revelation, where it says their teeth, talks about their teeth ripping out like a lion. Okay, so the connections are so vivid and clear that it helps us understand what's going on here in Revelation. Now, they had to use their coats or their mail or breastplates of iron to protect themselves. In Revelation 9, it said in verse 9, they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. In the Quran, it says, "God hath given you a coat of mail to defend you in your wars." So again, we don't have to make it up. It's right there. So what was the mission of Islam? Well, they had two things kind of run in parallel in Revelation. You have the mark of the beast. It says, "Go out and destroy all of these men who have the mark of the beast on their forehead, and all that goes with it." Well, this is the teaching of Catholicism and all that went with it. And then it says, "And those who had the seal of God," and all that goes with that. So those who were Christians, who had the fruit of the Spirit, the true Christians. Revelation 9 says, "And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass or anything green, neither any tree, but only those men who have not the seal of God in their forehead." And so they weren't supposed to go out and take the land and pilfer the land. They were just supposed to kill these people and destroy them. And that was their mission back then. Okay? So you have a bunch of these successors to Muhammad. You have Abu Bakr. He reigns for a very short period of time. He fought against those who were against Muhammad. If you were against Muhammad, you were a goner. And so he decided at some point to attack the entire Byzantine Empire. That's how large these people have gotten. From one man, they united as a group of people, and they decided, we'll just go out and attack the mark of the beast. Just go right for the Byzantine Empire. Remember you always in the presence of God, on the verge of death, and assurance of the judgment and hope of paradise. Avoid injustice and oppression. Let not your victory be stained, this is words of Muhammad, and the blood of women and children. Neither destroy palm trees, nor burn fields of corn, cut down no fruit trees, nor do any kind of mischief for cattle. Only as such you need to eat. So again, reference to Revelation chapter 9. You shall not hurt any green tree or any green thing. You will find another sort of people who belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have not shaven crowns. Be sure you cleave their skulls and give them no quarter till they either covet or convert or pay tribute. So this is the first caliph, successor to Muhammad. This is his words, and they echo Revelation chapter 9. I don't know if someone can get me some water. It would be great. So there were lots of conquests at that time that you can see the entire region of the Middle East was overtaken by Muhammad. All the areas from almost the tip of India all the way up to Greece was conquered by these conquests, and they were called the Wars of Umar. And they took place between 634 and 644. There were 4,050 cities taken during this reign. Palestine, Syria, parts of the Persian Empire were taken, and the empire stretched from Libya to India. And there were other conquests. There was the Uthman conquests, who succeeded Umar. And then you have this fourth caliph, the guy I talked about before, who was quite the character. Now, there was a small rift among Muhammad's people after Muhammad died. And this was the start of what's called the Shiites, or the Shias. So, and today, when you hear the news, they always talk about the Shiites, right? What are the Shiites? Well, they believe that you must be a direct descendant of Muhammad in order to be a caliph, okay? The Sunnis believe that you must be appointed by someone in Muhammad's tribe in order to be a caliph, and hence the brothers split. Now, all we ought to do is bring these two back together and get them to agree on something, and they'll be brothers again. But it's too late. There's been thousands of years since then, and at least 1,000 years, more than 1,000, and they're still enemies, and they're the worst of enemies. So when you hear the Shiites and the Sunnis fighting against one another, they're fighting about this, the fact they cannot agree who should be the next caliph of Muhammad, okay? And they've been fighting ever since, and this particular guy here, he was eventually killed. Okay, so now you have the beginning of what's called the Golden Age of Islam, and you probably remember this from history. For those who are in high school, you probably learned about this Golden Age of Islam. And one of the, you probably heard about algebra. Maybe some of us don't like algebra. I certainly don't like algebra, but that's where it came from. There were books, the 50 Thieves, what is it, Alibaba and the 50 Thieves. They all came from this Golden Age of Islam, and what happened was they collected all the knowledge from Rome, from the end of Rome, all the way up to the end of the Roman Empire, and they started this area in Istanbul, or was it Istanbul? Baghdad, from 750 to 1258 AD until the Mongols came in, and they basically set up this Golden Age of Islam. So Islam became basically the religion of the world, at least as we knew it at that time, okay? And it spread like wildfire. So this golden age of wisdom was established. Science, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, alchemy, all these things came from that golden age. The romantic age of the tales of the Arabian Nights and Aladdin's Wonderful Lamp and Alibaba and the 40 Thieves and the 7 Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor, they all came from that time period. And all the world's knowledge was translated into Arabic so that they became a great nation. Okay, so how long would this empire last? We don't have to guess, because it's right here in Revelation chapter 9. It says 5 months. And to them was given, in Revelation 9, was given that they should not kill them, but they should be tormented for 5 months. And their torment was the torment of scorpions when he striketh a man. And they had tails unto scorpions, so on and so forth. So if you use the principle of the 5 months equals 30 days, or 5 months equals 30 days, 150 days, and 150 days equals a year principle, you basically end up with 150 years. And guess what? There were 2 stages of this. 2 stages of 150 years, or 300 years of this rule of the Golden Age. So from 632 to 782, someone can do the math in their head, was the first period of Muhammad and the first period of Islam. The second period was this Abbasid Empire, this time of knowledge where the empire still existed, but its power to control the surrounded area had ended. And so there was a period of peace and this time of knowledge. So the locusts would judge, their judgment would consist of 2 stages of 150 years apiece. Okay, so the earth opens up and this fiery furnace comes out. Well, we said that was Islam being born and proliferated into all these religions into what we have today, and then the background that leads us to the modern history of the people who believe in Islam. And they come from this area of Arabia, and they are extended even into Palestine. Okay? So this is the beginning now of where we're headed. Now, I don't have to make this stuff up, because there are other commentators who agree with the same thing, that Revelation 9 is talking about this period of Muhammad. So you have John Wesley and Charles Wesley. They wrote, I think Charles Wesley wrote some of our hymns. Someone might correct me if I'm wrong. And then you have Matthew Henry, you have Goodby, Adam Clark. They all said that Revelation 10 agrees with the slaughter of the Syrians. Syrians is another name for Arabs, or for those who believe in Muhammad. So all of these men all refer to the locusts as the armies of the Medinian Empire, and they all agree. So I don't have to make it up. There's lots of history written about it. As Robert Weiland states, that the reformers clearly recognized Islam well into the 19th century. Mostly Protestant writers had a lot in common with Islam. They wanted to combat and protest against Catholicism, so they had something in common. And so they had no reason not to debate what Revelation 9 was about. Okay, a couple words to remember. Muhammad, he was the creator of the Islam religion. The Kaaba means the cube, which is the cube that meteor that fell from heaven. Mecca is a place where they go once in a lifetime. The Harajah is the pilgrims they take to go to Mecca. The Muslim means submitter. Ramadan was established after the Battle of Badr, where they had the unbelievable odds of 900 to 300. Caliph is a ruler who was the successor to Muhammad. The Shiites or Shias believed that you must be a direct descendant, and the Sunnis believed you had to be appointed. Okay, back to the timeline. Now we're going to move out of the Byzantine Empire, and we're going to move into the Ottoman Empire, which puts us almost into 1915, 1914, somewhere in that range. Okay, so in the Ottoman Empire, you had a lot of wars going on between France and England, okay, in this area of the Upper Levant and Lower Levant. And here you see the area of Palestine. This is Israel, to more or less an older map of Israel, which was called the land of Canaan. The Jews were God's chosen people who came out of Canaan. We know they were there from biblical times, from Genesis 11:31. Abraham said, "This is all yours, and to your seed forever for your inheritance." And Israel called them God's chosen people, the Jews. So who are the rightful owners of Israel or Palestine? It's the Jews, okay? So why do the Arabs feel that they should have Israel? That's the question. Okay, so we know that Israel always had problems with the land. There was a northern kingdom and an upper kingdom when Israel was split back in the Old Testament, right? Remember good old Jeroboam, after the sins of Jeroboam, right? He was a bad king, and God said, I'm going to split up the land into the northern and the southern kingdoms. So there's always been problems with Israel and land. I don't know why, but there is. In fact, you're going to see a picture in here, unless I deleted it, but there was a time, even today, where our neighbor, he owns several properties in the West Bank. And in order to claim your property, you have to put up a fence line. And he put up the fence, and one of his neighbors came out and, no, that's not my property. Move the fence over, 2 meters this way. And so now the fence got put in, and there's this little jiggity jag, and now he's trying to fight it, but he's probably going to lose. But it's all about land over there. It's all about land. And it's always been about land. Even from the beginning of Abraham, it's been about land. I mean, remember, Abraham and Lot given their special lots, right? The land, so Palestine was made up of both modern Israel and, at one time, modern-day Jordan. And you can see this it was called Transjordan back in the Ottoman Empire. Because that represented all of Israel at that time, so under the Ottoman Empire. And it wasn't until 1917 when the Balfour Declaration came out that, and here it is, little Balfour Declaration, just a typed letter on one page, 9.5 by 11. And it's so simple, yet this Balfour Declaration, we could talk about it for 2 hours. I wish we had 6 hours to talk about this, but you could talk about this for at least 2 hours, because what this did, this letter, was it introduced a pathway for the Jews to get back to the chosen land. And not because the British wanted it, it was because what the British realized when they split up after this war of, what was it, someone help me out, 1914 I think it was, for World War I. When they split up the upper and lower Levant, Palestine wasn't included. So all of the upper portion France got, and all of the lower portion Britain got, but Britain wanted control of the area, and Palestine happened to be right smack dab in the middle, and they never agreed on it. In fact, before the war was over, the French and the English were already getting together talking about how they were going to split up the land. And the war didn't even end yet. And so they agreed, but they couldn't agree on Palestine itself, and so they left it. And the Brits realized that this was strategic land for them to move goods in and out to India, all the way up to Britain. And so they needed this land. And in order to do it, they used the Jews. They said, well, aren't the Jews God's chosen people? Well, they should be allowed to go into the land. Well, the Balfour Declaration was the beginning of that, but guess what? It didn't allow Jews to come in very much. They were letting more Arabs in. For every Jew, they let 10 Arabs come in, because they didn't really want to give it to the Jews. But on paper, they did. And you can read this. It says, because it is clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So they're giving everyone else rights, but they say here that they are sympathetic. The following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by so on and so forth. So it was the beginning of the Jews being allowed to come into the land. So, and at this time, there really wasn't any Zionists in Britain. There was maybe 1 or 2 Zionists, but most of the Jews they were in Europe, surrounded by, they were in Germany, they were in Poland, what's the smaller country, Hungary, and all these different countries, and they were happy. They weren't being persecuted. It wasn't until Hitler came around that they were really persecuted. So Zionism wasn't really even known. And this is really a letter of Zionism, which the British trumped up to get the land. Okay? Now, just to bring everyone ahead, I only got 5 minutes, and I'm going to talk as fast as I can. So, religions in Israel. There are several types of religions. Obviously, you have Jews, you have Muslims, which represent almost 20% now. This is an older slide. And Christians only represent 2%. Remember, I said my neighbor was a Palestinian Christian. And then you have the Druze, and 4% is other. Not sure what other is. In 1917 and 1947, the British mandate split Palestine and Transjordan, and so the Jews started moving back in droves when Hitler came into power, because they had this way, this entrance to come through and do it. But obviously a lot of them couldn't escape, and they were killed, right? We know about World War II. So anything east of Jordan was called Transjordan. Anything west of the Jordan was called Palestine, and it was divided between Jews and Arabs. Now, I'm going to skip a couple of slides here, because in 1948 we know Israel became a nation. And there were a lot of wars that took place in order for that to happen. And Israel won fair and square against all their enemies. And they were able to then declare Palestine as the nation of Israel. And we know this, right? We're Christadelphians. We all know about 1948. 1948. When? 1948, right? So the Christadelphians are waiting, of course, because the beginning of 1948 marks a sign. It marks the beginning of when Jesus will return, because it says, this generation shall not pass away. And a generation is about, anybody? 70 years, right. So when will he come back? Any moment. Might come back right now. Okay, so depending on the sources and the definition, who you talk to, there was between 10 and 70 massacres that occurred in the 1948 war. If you talk to Palestinians, they'll claim there was several, and I have a few listed here. There were 70 massacres in 1948. These are the Israeli ones. So you have the Dur Yassin massacre, killed 120, these are mixed. So you have the Dur Yassin massacre, 112 Arabs were killed. You have the Shahai massacre, 60 or 70 Arabs killed. But you can go through the list. Look them up on the internet. There's tons of these massacres that occurred. And so you have each side kind of pointing at each other saying, you killed my brother, you killed my brother. But it's war. It was war. So there's going to be a lot of massacres. But the Palestinians will bring this up over and over again about how bad the Jews are. And I can tell you that it was both ways. It wasn't just the Jews killing Arabs, and it wasn't the Arabs just killing Jews. It was a war. Okay, there was a resolution, 194, where the United Nations said they adopted in 1948, that near the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli war, the resolution defined the principles for reaching a final settlement and returning Palestine refugees to their homes. The problem is that these refugees, they had a choice. They could go back home, which is what UN Resolution 194 said, or they could stay in the land and become assimilated into the Jewish nation. And they chose neither. They chose neither. So they became basically refugees. And there are millions of refugees. Now they've had children and children's children, and these refugees have expanded to the point where they're starting to push the envelopes of the land. And of course they want the rich parts of the land where the water is and where the fertile portions are, just like back in the time of Abraham and Lot. Okay, so how was the land split up? Well, you had the area of the West Bank, which was given to the Arabs, and you had the Gaza Strip, which was given to the Arabs. Now, what happens is that there was a war in 1967, right, the Six-Day War, where I think it was the president of Egypt who had the best air force around. And he decides he's going to wage war. Well, the Jews found out about it, and so they went and destroyed all these airplanes that were sitting on the tarmac. And the Egyptian king starts shivering. And so he gets on his red phone. They didn't have cell phones back then. And he picks up his red phone. He calls his friend in Lebanon, the king of Lebanon. He says, hey, I'm winning the war down here. You need to join me and help me from the north. And he picks up the red phone and he calls his friends over in Jordan, King Jordan. He says, hey, I'm winning the war down here. You need to help me from the east. Okay, click. And now you have this war going on, and it only lasted 6 days because there was no air force. It was dumb. You know, he was destroyed. And so you have these stupid Lebanese and the Jordanians who thought they were winning the war when actually they were losing, and the Jews were ready. They knew exactly what was going to happen, and they won fair and square. So now Israel owns the West Bank. Israel owns the Gaza Strip, which was Egyptian controlled. And now you have the beginning of an establishment for a different type of war, because you have people still living in the land in the West Bank. You have Arabs still living there, Jordanians still living there, and you have Egyptians living in the Gaza Strip who are Arabs from the time of Muhammad, and they are followers of Islam, okay? And so they want the land. So what do? Well, here's a picture of that. I was talking about that fence line that jogs, supposed to be straight. There's the jog right there, because they cannot agree on land. So they just make their own rules as they go along. Okay, we're not going to talk about the intifadas, but there were 2 uprisings. An intifada means an uprising. There were 2 of them. Here's our good old president at one time who tried during Camp David to bring peace. You can see that you have the Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak on the left, and Bill Clinton. And the problem with that this failed was essentially Yasser Arafat said, well, I agree to everything, but only if you let all of the Arabs come in. All. Well, we're talking millions of Arabs who would come from the Middle East to the West Bank and Gaza. And this was ridiculous. Even the Palestinians realized this is ridiculous. what he was trying to gain in this talk, and so it failed. Okay, here you see him shaking hands, but just in the picture. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about Jerusalem, the city that was fought over, but just recently Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish people. And when he did this was in January of this year, there was an uprising. Not a big one, but a small one. The Palestinians basically rose up and said, no, you can't do that, so on and so forth. So important details about the Palestine and Palestinians. There's no language known as Palestinian. It doesn't exist. Okay, they're Arabics. They speak Arabic. They're Arabs. The Palestinian culture is distinct from all that of Arabs in the area. There has never been a land known as Palestine governed by Palestinians. It doesn't exist. Palestinians are Arabs, indistinguishable from Arabs throughout the Middle East. In 1922, Britain allocated nearly 80% of Palestine to Transjordan. Thus, Jordan covers the majority of the land of Palestine under this British mandate. And Jordan also includes the majority of the Arabs who live there. In other words, Jordan is the Arab portion of Palestine, if you will, which I talked about, which was one fair and square in 1967. And the residents of Palestine are called Palestinians, since Palestine includes both modern-day Israel, Jordan, and Arab and Jewish residents. Okay, so on the left you have the Jordanian flag, which you see has a star and a triangle, black, white, and green. And on the right, you have the Palestinian flag. Oh, it looks exactly the same, except there's a star missing. Now, this guy, Wahad Shubat, who was a former PLO terrorist, who is now a convert, but he says, why is it that on June 4th, 1967, I was Jordanian, and overnight I became a Palestinian? We did not particularly mind Jordanian rule. The teaching of the destruction of Israel was a defined part of their curriculum, but we considered ourselves Jordanian until the Jews returned to Jerusalem. Then all of a sudden we were Palestinians. They removed the star from the Jordanian flag, and all at once we had a Palestinian flag. When I finally realized the lies and myths I was taught, it was my duty as a righteous person to speak out. So these people have not been around the area of Palestine forever and ever. And here you have kind of, the true biblical hierarchy of Abraham and Sarah. We know that it was Isaac who was offered on the altar, not Ishmael. And then of course you have Hagar, who was through Ishmael would be a great nation. Okay, and that's what we're talking about in Revelation 9 here. I won't go into the rest of this. So who are the Palestinians then? Well, the Palestinians want the land. They refuse to admit that the Jews are God's chosen people. The Palestinian Christians believe they inherited the land, but nowhere in Scripture is it mentioned. In fact, they're not even part of Jacob. So they focus on who was living in the land when they were property owners for about the last 100 years. So we'll skip this slide. So this is Reverend Samuel Manning. This was written in the 40s. It says, day by day, we learn afresh the lessons now upon us that the denunciations of ancient prophecy have been fulfilled to the very letter. This is in a book called These Holy Fields. The land is left void and desolate and without inhabitants. He's basically saying that in the 40s, when they went to scope out the land, and this is a book you can get in the library, it was desolate there. There was no one living there. If the Palestinians were living in the land at the time that they claim they were, it wouldn't be desolate. There wouldn't be, what are they called? Not nomads, but the Bedouins. There wouldn't be Bedouins. That's all that was there, was empty land and Bedouins. So history shows that the Arabs entered the land mainly through the inception of the Balfour Declaration. Britain, during its mandate, had turned a blind eye to this illegal flood of Arabs into the land because they didn't want the Jews to take the land, even though the Balfour Declaration said they should allow them in. Whenever it was a 1 to 10 ratio, 10 Arabs for every Jew who got in. And so, in fact, in 1930, the British Hope Simpson Commission said this: prevention of illicit immigration to stop the illegal Arab immigration. So in 1930, they already recognized this as a problem, that there were too many Arabs coming into the land. So they weren't there before, they were coming in. Franklin D. Roosevelt said in May 17, 1937, the Arab immigration to Palestine since 1921 was much greater than the Jewish immigration. This is in history. We don't have to make it up. It's open the history books and you can find it. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill noted in 1939 regarding Arabs in Palestine, the Arabs have crowded into the country and multiplied till their population has increased more than ever, and all Jewry could lift up the Jewish population. This is in 1939. Okay, I hope I can play this. It's really fast, but there's two men here. Muhammad al-Habish, who is the Syrian Islamic scholar. He's a writer and a politician. I'm almost done. He is the principal figure for the Islamic revivalist movement in Syria. And the second guy is Muhammad Hussein. And he wears one of these Egyptian top hats. Okay? He's a Grand Mufti. He's the overseer of the Temple Mount. And I hope this plays. It's really fast. I'll play it twice. If it works. If it works. If it works. It's not working. All right. What he says is, the first guy says, "We have been here for over 5,000 years." We have been here for over 5,000 years. No, they have not been there for 5,000 years. They've been there for about 100 years since the Balfour Declaration. Yes, they come from a long history of Arabs in the Middle East, but they have not been there for 5,000 years. And then the Grand Mufti says something like, the Palestinian people own the land or something like that. So I'm sorry it doesn't play. I had to go to a different laptop, but we'll get it working maybe later and we'll show you the slide. So, okay, I'm going to skip this one. So I asked my neighbor, what would solve this Palestinian conflict? And he said, okay, first, liberate the West Bank. Israeli to relinquish the West Bank totally and a Palestinian state to be recognized. Secondly, Israel settlements to be retracted because they are encroaching and in some cases are on physical Palestinian land. I didn't make this up. I asked my neighbor, what would it take? This is what they said. Stop controlling the water, stop controlling the airspace, stop controlling the rivers and the seas. Give the refugees who are without a passport a chance to decide to come home or give them citizenship. Palestinians who fled their homes in 1948, 1967, and 1973, and the walls have to come down. This is what I just asked my neighbor, what would you want? I just want to tell everyone what you would want. This is what they want. Okay. I wish we had more time. There's a really short video, about 20 minutes, but it really talks about where the Palestinians are from, because some Palestinians say, well, we're from Palestine. Some say, no, we go all the way back to the time of who are the giants in the earth? The Philistines, okay? And in each case, they go through each case study and they say, no, they can't be from the Philistines, because if they were from the Philistines, they wouldn't own Israel proper. They'd have to go back to the land of Tyre, okay? And they go through each one of these cases to prove that the Palestinians are not owners of the land. It's interesting, and I'll send the link out, and actually on our website I have the whole entire presentation in its entirety split into 6 sections, and in your free times you can definitely download them and view them and combine them all together and make one presentation and call it your own. I don't care. But the Palestinians, so these are some Palestinian myths I just want to go through. Some people say, well, the Palestinians don't pay taxes to Israel. Uncle Bill said this to me. They don't pay taxes. They pay taxes. It's not true. They pay to the local government as required. Yes, there's poor people who can't pay their taxes. There's always poor people. But things like water and gas and those resources, those taxes are paid. You don't get water if you don't pay, okay? Palestinians don't pay Israel for any resources. False. They are not a burden to Israel. That's just not true. Most resources are paid by local governments in Israel. Many companies are privately owned and governed by laws of Israel. Therefore, the water would be shut off just like any other country if the person or people don't want to pay. We'll talk about that one. Okay, and the rest is really what I showed today, which is, you know, there's still demonstrations going on between the Palestinians regarding their movement and who they are. If you look at the picture on the right, it says, this moment in time, there are Israeli jails. They say 6,500 Palestinian political prisoners. There's 29 detainees, 56 female detainees, 500 detainees serving life sentences, 300 children under the age of 18. Whether this is true or not, and it very well could be true, it's a war. There's a war going on. And it's not a war of guns, per se. It's a war of who owns the land. And it's a different kind of war that's ever been fought, because when the Palestinians have uprised, they go and they blow up the most precious thing of all, which is women and children, to get to the heart of the man. And that's what is really terrible about this war. And at the same time, there's things going on the other side of Israel. It's provocation, because in every war there are no rules. And there are innocent people on the Palestinian side who are being killed, from time to time. So it does happen. And each side can point the finger at each other. But the fact of the matter is, there will be no peace in Israel until God gives peace. And one of the things I think Esther and I saw, just in summary, was that this wall, and every wall that's ever been built over time, the China Wall in Berlin, pardon?
Berlin.
Yeah, you're right. That wall didn't keep the enemy out. You're not going to keep the enemy out by building a wall. But it doesn't matter. That wall symbolizes provocation. It symbolizes war. And until that wall comes down, just like the Berlin Wall, the China Wall, until those walls are destroyed or opened up and people feel safe and secure, and that can only happen, I believe, by looking at that wall, can only happen by God. It can't happen by man deciding to create peace, because you can see that the war, we're just on the brink of war every day over there, because it only takes one person to shoot another to create a war. So one last thing. So in Beit Zahora, we saw the sign U.S. aid. So U.S. does give a lot of aid to the rehabilitation of the Palestinians and to Israel. This one was given to the Palestinians. So I took a picture of it. This was back in 2007. There's that ugly wall that needs to come down one day, and I think only God will bring that wall down to bring peace. And let's see here. I think I showed you these pictures at lunch. Some food. We don't need to see food again. And that's it. Any questions? Yes?
Well, under the Golden Age, the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims lived in relatively peace, at least what I know in Spain, before Isabella and Ferdinand came to power.
That's correct. It was a time of peace.
Yeah.
Yes. And actually, when we were in Eilat and we took our boat ride, and the guy who leased us the boat, he said, look out here into the Sea of Aqaba. Over here is Jordan. Over here is Israel. Don't go over to Jordan. And I said, well, you guys are at peace. And he goes, just on paper. And it's true. Peace is only as good as a sheet of paper it's written on, really. Yes.
And also the Muslims recognize Jesus as a prophet.
They recognize him as a prophet. That's correct.
And they pay, in some countries, much respect to him too.
That's correct.
And in some of the I don't know if you know Rumi, but he writes very loving about Jesus.
Yes. And my neighbor, I love my neighbor. He's a great guy. He claims he's Palestinian. He has a Jordanian passport, and a U.S. passport. But I can sympathize with their plight. Obviously, if you feel that you own this land because he has property in that land, he has several acres in the land of the West Bank, and so he's not thinking back 20 generations or 40 generations. He's thinking back 2 or 3 generations, and that's all he knows. And because of that, and because of all of the uprising and the unification of the Palestinian people throughout the last 40 to 60 years, he has no reason to believe otherwise. Any other comments? Well, thank you very much for letting me share my story with you. Thank you.
On behalf of everyone here, we'd like to thank our brother Jared and Sister Esther for taking their trip and putting together this slideshow and bringing together the problems that can only be solved by the return of our Master. As we open with a prayer, we'll ask our Brother Troy to close our meeting with a prayer. Brother Troy, we can all remain seated.